The morning sky over southern England looked like it was bleeding. July 15, 1940. Biggin Hill Airfield. Just after 5 a.m., a gray dawn slid over the hangars, lighting up rows of Spitfires lined like exhausted prize-fighters. You could still smell last night's bombing, cordite, burning fuel, wet earth. Somewhere beyond the trees, sirens began again, the first scramble of the day. Pilots ran with helmets half-fastened, ground crews swearing as they tried to patch bullet holes that hadn't even cooled. One Spitfire's engine coughed, spat a burst of smoke, then died. Its mechanic slammed the cowling shut and shouted over the roar of propellers, "She's cooked, pistons cracked." They didn't have time to fix it. Up above, radar had already spotted another German formation crossing the channel. 30 bombers, dozens of Messerschmitt escorts. Inside the ready room, Flight Sergeant Alan Reeves rubbed black grease off his hands and muttered, "Bloody hell, we can't catch them up there." He meant altitude, 20,000 feet and climbing, where the 109s always owned the sky. Every time they tried to chase, the Spitfires overheated or stalled. Still, the scramble bell rang. 12 Spitfires clawed into the air, engines howling through the thin morning mist. Within minutes, the first one was trailing smoke, hit before it could even form up. Another pilot's voice broke over the radio, young, panicked. "I can't climb, I can't climb," then static. By the time Reeves returned, only 7 planes came back with him. 2 landed with dead engines. 1 belly flopped in a nearby field, fuel still burning. The rest didn't come back. What happened over those next few minutes, one man's decision in a hangar nobody cared about, would quietly change that. It would make the Spitfire climb faster than anything the Germans could throw at it. But in July of 1940, nobody knew that yet. All they knew was they were losing. They called it climb hell. The Bf 109s could reach 20,000 feet a full minute faster than a Spitfire. That single minute was death. When the warning came in, "Bandits, Angels 2-0," our pilots were still sweating on the runway. By the time they reached altitude, the bombers had dropped their loads, and the escorts were already diving home. It wasn't cowardice, it was physics. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine was the heart of the Spitfire, 27 liters of liquid-cooled beauty, but she had a fatal flaw. Too much throttle, too much boost, and she'd melt herself from the inside out. Command limited the pressure to 6¼ pounds. On paper, it kept engines alive. In the sky, it got men killed. They tried everything: richer fuel mixtures, extra coolant, new prop pitch. Nothing worked. The moment they pushed her too hard, the temperature needles spiked, pistons warped, and the cockpit filled with the smell of hot glycol. That sweet, burning syrup smell pilots learned to fear. In 1 week alone, Biggin Hill lost 17 Merlins, not to enemy fire, but to their own limits. Sergeant Pilot Hugh Mallory was one of them. His Spitfire caught a burst from behind, dove to escape, and tried to climb back into the fight. The coolant boiled over. His last radio call was calm, eerily calm. "Tell the boys the needle's gone red." The engine seized seconds later. Mallory never got out. 2 days after that, another, Pilot Officer Frank "Dingo" Harris. He went in over the channel. Fuel tank ruptured, engine coughing like a dying animal. Witnesses said his plane exploded just as he tried to ditch. You could smell the burning fuel all the way to the cliffs. It felt like watching friends drown in slow motion. And all the brass could say was, "Stay within boost limits." To the men on the ground, it was insanity. They were watching pilots die because of a number stamped on a gauge. No one dared challenge it. Until one night, a mechanic nobody remembered decided to. His name was leading aircraftman Thomas Hall, though everyone just called him Tommy. 23 years old, thin as a broom handle, a Yorkshire farm kid who joined the RAF as an engine fitter because he couldn't afford college. He wasn't loud, wasn't special. Most of the other mechanics saw him as the quiet one, who talked to engines like they were alive. "All in his bloody superstitions," they'd say, rolling their eyes. He'd always pat the side of a Merlin before startup, whisper something like a prayer. That July, Tommy had been on night duty, 12-hour shifts keeping Spitfires patched together between raids. The hangar lights buzzed like hornets. Every surface smelled of petrol, sweat, and hot metal. He'd been filing maintenance logs when he overheard two pilots arguing nearby. "Doesn't matter how good we are," one said, "we can't bloody climb with them." The other laughed bitterly. "Then we're fighting gravity, not Hitler." Tommy wrote those words down in the margin of his notebook. Fighting gravity. He kept thinking about it through the next shift, as he replaced cracked pistons, as he scrubbed oil from the floor, as another damaged Spitfire was towed in like a wounded bird. He started reading manuals, old test notes, anything he could find in the maintenance office. That's when he noticed something. Early Merlin engines, the older ones, didn't have the boost regulator sealed. The screw that limited pressure could technically be adjusted. It was supposed to be checked, locked, left alone. But if someone were to, say, move the pressure line slightly, the engine might give more power before hitting redline. More power meant faster climb, but it also meant risk, catastrophic risk. And doing it without authorization wasn't just stupid, it was illegal. One of the sergeants caught him staring at the open cowling that night. "Hall, stop daydreaming. We've got 4 more to service before dawn." "Yes, sir," he said. But he didn't stop thinking. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He just couldn't stand the idea of sending another friend into the air, knowing the machine itself might betray them. That night, the hangar was nearly empty. Just the echo of rain on tin roof, the occasional hiss of pressure from a fuel line. Tommy waited until the last crewman left for the canteen. Then he closed the side door, pulled out his flashlight, and went to work. He picked a Spitfire scheduled for morning patrol, K9906, the one assigned to Alan Reeves. He loosened the cowl panel, exposing the gleaming maze of pipes and cables. His hands were shaking. He unscrewed the pressure line from the supercharger control. A hiss of warm air brushed his cheek. He froze, listening. No footsteps, only rain. He adjusted the small brass washer by less than the width of a fingernail, filed it down with a hand tool until it fit snug. Then he reconnected it. It was the smallest crime imaginable, a quarter turn of metal, invisible to anyone but him. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, leaving a streak of oil. When he tried to close the cowling, his wrench slipped and sliced open his knuckle. Blood dotted the wing. He wrapped it in a rag and kept working. By the time he finished, his heart was hammering so loud he was sure someone would hear. He tested the line one last time. Hiss, steady, no leak. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "Don't blow up on me, girl." The floodlights outside flicked on. Tommy flinched, nearly dropped the wrench. A voice shouted from across the hangar. "Hall, you still in there?" "Just finishing up, Sergeant." He snapped the cowling shut, wiped the blood off the paint, and forced a grin. Nobody noticed the change. A fraction of pressure, a secret sealed under rivets. But the next morning, that tiny act would face its trial in the sky. The next morning broke too quietly. July 16th, 1940. The clouds sat low and heavy, the kind that turned the world into a steel-gray ocean. Flight Sergeant Alan Reeves walked across the flight line with a mug of lukewarm tea and a cigarette half-burned between his fingers. He didn't know his Spitfire had been touched. Tommy Hall stood near the hangar door, pretending to check the toolbox. His hand throbbed under the bandage. He tried not to look, but he couldn't help it. The exact plane he'd modified was taxiing out. The ground shook as the Merlin coughed to life. It sounded different, deeper, angrier. Tommy felt his stomach twist. If he'd overdone it, the engine could seize before takeoff. Reeves gave a thumbs up to the line chief. Biggin Hill control to Yellow Flight. Intercept inbound bombers, Angels 20. Good hunting. The 12 Spitfires rolled down the strip, noses lifting into the mist. Tommy watched until the roar disappeared above the clouds. Then he sat down on an oil drum and stared at the floor, hearing every worst-case scenario in his head. 15,000 feet over Kent, Reeves pushed the throttle forward. Normally, the temperature needle would have started climbing. Today, it didn't. The engine roared like a chained animal, but it held. The climb rate felt unreal. "Yellow 1 to control," he radioed. "We're moving up fast. What's our target?" "Bombers at 2-3,000, heading Dover." He looked right. The other Spitfires were struggling to keep pace. "Come on, girls," he muttered, coaxing the plane higher. He could feel the air thinning, the stick fighting back. But the engine didn't falter. Then came the shout, "Bogies! 11 o'clock high!" Black dots dropping from the sun, Messerschmitts diving to meet them. Reeves' squadron leader barked, "Brake! Brake now!" Reeves rolled left and yanked the nose upward. The new boost kicked in like a punch to the chest. The Spitfire leapt. The Messerschmitt overshot underneath, tracer fire streaking harmlessly past. Reeves flipped over the top and dropped behind the German's tail. He squeezed the trigger. 303 rounds stitched across the sky. The 109 burst into flame, peeling away in smoke. Static crackled through the radio. Disbelief. "Christ, Reeves, how the hell did you do that?" "I just pulled up." He didn't mention the engine tone that sounded wilder than anything he'd flown before. The gauges danced on the red line, but the Merlin kept singing. Another 109 came in from above. Reeves rolled again, pulling vertical, a move no Spitfire could usually manage. The enemy overshot, stalled, and went tumbling out of control. Reeves' wingman shouted over the radio, "You're bloody mad!" By the time they landed, the Germans were gone, and 2 enemy fighters were smoking in the channel. On the ground, Reeves climbed out grinning like he'd seen a ghost. "She's a devil today," he told the crew chief. "Climbed like a rocket, and the boost gauge went clean past 12. The sergeant frowned. 12? That can't be right. Tommy froze. His ears buzzed. He waited for the accusation. But Reeves just patted the fuselage. "Whatever you lads did, keep doing it." That night, Tommy couldn't sleep. Every knock on the barracks door made his stomach lurch. He kept expecting military police to show up, drag him out for sabotage. But nobody came. Instead, rumors did. Pilots started talking about that one Spitfire that climbs like a banshee. Someone said it had a special Merlin. Someone else claimed it used German fuel. Nobody guessed the truth. A brass washer, half a millimeter thinner than regulation. 2 days later, a new raid came in. 40 bombers, 60 escorts. Reeves' squadron went up again. This time, Tommy's modification wasn't the only one. He'd whispered the trick to another mechanic, who'd tried it on 2 planes, quietly, without orders. The morning was chaos, black flak clouds, contrails tearing through blue. Radios filled with voices, shouts, screams, static. Reeves's Spitfire tore upward after a bomber formation. "Climb, climb, damn it! I'm at full throttle, hold it!" For the first time in weeks, they actually caught them. The Spitfires came up from below the bombers, not behind. Reeves fired into a Heinkel's belly, watched it shear apart in mid-air. A Messerschmitt dove to intercept, but couldn't match his angle. Reeves rolled, fired, and the German went down, trailing smoke. Down below, Tommy listened to the chatter on the radio link. Yellow leader to control. Bandits breaking off. Repeat, they're running. He felt his knees go weak. He walked outside into the sunlight, greasy hands trembling, and just stared up at the empty sky. For the first time that summer, the bombers were the ones turning back early. In the mess hall that evening, nobody mentioned Tommy's name. But pilots were whispering about something new, a phrase spreading through the base. 12-pound boost. Every squadron wanted it. Nobody knew where it came from. By the end of the week, it wasn't just Biggin Hill. Mechanics at Tangmere, Hornchurch, Debden, they all started checking the pressure lines. Quietly, after hours, like a secret society of rule breakers. The RAF's entire southern wing began flying hotter, faster, stronger. A pattern appeared in the after-action reports. Fewer engine failures, higher engagement altitude, kill ratios starting to climb, from 1 to 2 to 1 to 1, then 1.5 in our favor. And on the other side of the channel, Luftwaffe intelligence noticed. German pilots began reporting Spitfires that defied gravity, climbing vertically where they'd once stalled. A captured radio log from a 109 squadron told the story better than any memo. Achtung! The English machines, they are faster climbing now. Impossible! Impossible! Static, then silence. Back in the hangar, Tommy just kept his head down. He heard the gossip, but never joined in. Every night, he double-checked his engines, retightened bolts, wiped fingerprints off the cowling. He knew the more people copied it, the closer it came to exposure. One evening, his section leader called him over. "Hall, command wants to inspect the boost lines tomorrow. Something about over-performance data. You know anything about that?" Tommy swallowed hard. "No, sir." The sergeant studied him for a moment, then shrugged. "Good, because if anyone's been fiddling, they'll hang for it." That night, Tommy couldn't breathe. He sat on the floor behind the tool bench, staring at his hands, the same hands that had done it. All for one reason: to keep his pilots alive. But if command found out, they'd destroy him. When morning came, inspectors walked the line of Spitfires. Tommy followed behind them, pretending to check spark plugs. They opened one cowling after another, glanced inside, and closed it again. "Everything within spec," one officer muttered. "Strange that the test data doesn't match the readings." His partner shrugged. "Maybe the instruments are off. These boys need every ounce they can get." And just like that, they left. Tommy nearly laughed, a half-mad, exhausted sound. For the first time, he realized the truth. Nobody wanted to stop it anymore. The trick worked, and once something saves lives, it stops being illegal. By mid-August, the RAF had quietly authorized a temporary experimental boost allowance, an official way to make the illegal legal without admitting it. The new limit was 12 pounds, exactly what Tommy had set. The result was immediate. Spitfires began meeting German fighters on even terms. Dogfights that once felt hopeless now turned into duels. Pilots stopped dying by the dozen. When word reached Rolls-Royce, their engineers tested the data and confirmed what field mechanics already knew. The Merlin could take it. The factory began retuning the engines themselves, but on the base, nobody celebrated. There was no medal, no memo, no acknowledgement of where the change had begun. The system absorbed it, polished it, and called it progress. Tommy just went back to tightening bolts. Autumn 1940. The Battle of Britain was now full burn. Hundreds of sorties every day, the sky never empty for long. Biggin Hill's runways were patched with bomb craters. Half the hangars had holes in the roof. Yet somehow, the mood had shifted. The men could feel it first, a strange confidence creeping into their bones. For weeks, they'd lived on nerves and cigarettes. Now there was talk of odds evening up. Reeves came in from another mission, his Spitfire streaked with soot and victory. He jumped off the wing, eyes bright. "3 of 'em today," he said, half laughing, half incredulous, "came straight at us and couldn't climb past. We met 'em head-on." The mechanics cheered. Someone tossed him a canteen of water. Tommy stood in the back, quietly smiling, hands still black with grease. He wanted to tell them. He wanted to say, "You're flying on that 1/2 millimeter I filed down with a pocket tool." But he stayed silent. The only sign of pride was the faint tremor in his fingers as he lit a cigarette. By October, whispers about the 12-pound Spits reached every airfield from Cornwall to Scotland. The RAF never made a public statement, but flight chiefs started issuing quiet orders. Boost to 12 only in combat. The paperwork still called it temporary emergency procedure. In practice, it became gospel. Mechanics worked late under dim yellow lamps, adjusting regulators, logging nothing. Pilots watched their altimeters spin faster, their climb charts rewriting themselves overnight. The results were staggering. The average interception rate, the number of times they reached bombers before release, jumped from 40% to nearly 70%. For the first time, the Luftwaffe began losing bombers faster than they could replace them. Inside the German command bunker at Pas de Calais, Oberst Werner Mulders studied the reports. "Impossible," he muttered, tapping the page. "They are gaining altitude faster than before. Our engines are unchanged. How?" His adjutant shrugged. "Perhaps new fuel, or a different propeller." Mulders frowned. "No, something else, something mechanical." Out over the channel, German pilots were discovering it the hard way. They'd dive to attack, expecting to break away with their usual advantage. But now the Spitfires stayed glued to their tails. Radio chatter crackled with disbelief. "Achtung! The English are climbing with us! They follow vertical! How can they—" Static. Then the sound of gunfire. One 109 pilot who bailed out later described it to his interrogator. "They came up like hawks. I thought I had the sun. Then suddenly they were beside me, guns flashing. My engine couldn't breathe that high, but theirs roared." He shook his head. It was like the laws of the sky had changed overnight. Back in Britain, they didn't talk about laws or physics. They just called it luck, the luck of the Merlin. But Tommy knew luck had nothing to do with it. He saw it in the data sheets, the torn-up engines that returned, the heat scars on the cylinder heads. He knew exactly how close each flight came to disaster. Every time a Spitfire took off, he felt his heart go with it. Every time one didn't come back, he wondered if he'd gone too far. Late one night, he was closing the hangar when Reeves walked in carrying a bottle. "For you lot," Reeves said, grinning. "Saved my hide more than once." Tommy tried to play dumb. "Just doing our job, sir." Reeves leaned closer, his tone softer now. "Don't give me that. I've been in her cockpit. I know she's different." For a long moment, they just stood there, the sound of rain on metal. Then Reeves said quietly, "Whatever you did, don't undo it." He left the bottle on the bench and walked away. Tommy sat down beside it, staring at the label. He'd been invisible his whole life. For once, someone saw him. By winter, the tide had turned. The Luftwaffe was losing more planes than it could replace. Goering raged in his briefings, demanding explanations. The Germans began flying higher, hoping altitude might bring back their edge. It didn't. The improved Merlins, now officially modified at the factory, were outperforming even the best Daimler-Benz engines. British pilots noticed something new. They could choose the fight. They could climb, strike, and vanish. In one raid over London, Reeves' squadron intercepted a formation of Heinkel bombers. The Spitfires came from below the cloud base, climbing straight through. Reeves' voice was steady over the radio. "Pick your target, gentlemen. They can't shake us now." Tracer rounds lit the clouds like fireworks. German gunners panicked, their formations breaking apart. Reeves downed 2 before his guns jammed. Another pilot radioed, laughing hysterically, "They're running! Look at them go!" When they landed, the field erupted in cheers. For the first time since the summer, Britain felt like it could win. But for Tommy, victory came with unease. He'd heard stories of engines burning out mid-flight, pilots bailing out over the channel. The new boost gave power, but it also pushed the machines to their limits. One evening, he inspected a Merlin that had seized mid-combat. The pistons were black, valves warped from heat. He ran his fingers over the damage and whispered, "I'm sorry." The sergeant beside him asked, "You talking to the engine or the pilot?" Tommy didn't answer. He knew the truth. Every improvement carried a cost. He'd given them power, but also risk. And yet, compared to the death toll before, it was a trade worth making. Winter turned to spring. London still bore its scars, but the bombing eased. The Luftwaffe turned east toward Russia. Britain exhaled, finally. Reeves got promoted, squadron leader now. His name went into the papers, his face on a recruitment poster. The few, they called them, heroes of the Battle of Britain. Tommy stayed on the ground, same greasy coveralls, same oil under his nails. He read the headlines while tightening bolts on another Merlin. When Reeves passed by, he gave a nod and a grin. That was enough. He never told anyone what he'd done. Not because he was scared anymore, but because it didn't matter. The war had a way of erasing fingerprints. By 1942, the higher boost Merlins became standard across every Spitfire model. The factories built them that way now. Stronger pistons, better fuel mix, new supercharger gears. Historians would later write that Rolls-Royce developed a breakthrough in engine efficiency. But the first breakthrough had happened in a dim hangar, under the buzz of a single bulb, in the hands of a nobody named Hall. He never appeared in reports. Not a single maintenance log bore his name beside the modification. It was as if the war itself conspired to keep him invisible. One summer afternoon, 2 years later, Reeves returned to Biggin Hill for a visit. He found Tommy sitting outside the hangar, eating from a tin. "Still here?" Reeves asked. "Someone's got to keep you lot in the air." Reeves laughed, sat beside him. For a while they just watched the new Spitfires take off. Cleaner, faster, sharper. "They're saying these new Merlins can climb 1,500 feet per minute faster than before," Reeves said. Tommy shrugged. "Guess someone figured something out." Reeves gave him a look, that same quiet understanding from years ago. Yeah, someone did. They didn't talk about it again. When Reeves left, he shook Tommy's hand and said, "If we get out of this alive, I owe you a pint." Tommy smiled. "I'll hold you to it." By the end of the war, Reeves had 19 confirmed kills. He survived. He went home to Devon, opened a small garage, fixed farm trucks for the rest of his life. Tommy didn't fare as well. Years of fumes and sleepless nights caught up to him. He left the RAF in '46. No pension, no medal. Found work repairing buses in Leeds. Most nights he came home too tired to talk. He never married, but every so often he'd stop at the local pub and hear someone mention the Spitfires, how they'd saved Britain, how the Merlin engine was a masterpiece. He'd just nod, smile faintly, and say, "Aye, she was a good one, that Merlin." After the war, Britain kept the trophies. The aces, the headlines, the speeches about the few. There were posters in recruiting offices with sharp-jawed pilots in leather jackets and goggles looking 10 feet tall under the words, "We stood alone." What they didn't print was the kid on the ground at 3 a.m., covered in oil, tightening a bolt with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Because if he got this wrong, the engine would tear itself apart and throw his pilot into the channel. The country remembered the tip of the spear. It almost never remembers the hand that sharpened it. Tommy Hall went home in the winter of 1946. No parade, no ceremony. A train ticket north and a canvas duffel. He stepped off at Leeds Station wearing a D-mob suit that didn't quite fit, carrying everything he owned in one hand and £26 in back pay in his pocket. The war was over. The posters said, "Britain thanks you." But the truth was colder. Britain was broke, bombed out, and tired. It wasn't built to remember the quiet ones. He rented a room over a bakery. The whole place smelled like burned flour and yeast. He got work at a bus depot. Municipal contracts, nothing glamorous. He fixed cracked radiators. He drained gearboxes. He patched leaky fuel lines with the same calm patience he'd once used on the Merlin engines that kept the country alive. Nobody there called him LAC Hall. They just called him Tom. Co-workers liked him fine, said he was steady, said he didn't waste words, said he'd work through lunch if a job needed finishing. But if you'd asked any of them, "Did you know this man helped change the climb rate of the Spitfire in 1940?" they would have laughed. It would have sounded like a joke. Because here's the hard truth. History doesn't always erase you with violence. Sometimes it erases you with paperwork. On paper, the higher boost limits were a field adjustment confirmed by Rolls-Royce engineering tests. On paper, it was eventually standardized by Air Ministry Bulletin in late August. On paper, it was neat, controlled, professional. But that first night, that first half-millimeter of brass filed down in the dark, with a bandaged hand and a pounding heart and the fear of prison sitting right there in his throat, that wasn't in any bulletin. That part stayed human. And humans get lost. In 1953, almost 13 years after that first illegal boost, Tommy took a trip down south. Nobody invited him. He just went. He said he wanted to see how things ended up. He rode 2 trains and a lorry and walked the last mile on foot. He found Biggin Hill again. Not the same Biggin Hill. Not the desperate, smoking, bombed-out fighter station of 1940. Now it was cleaner, quieter. Training flights, demonstration days. But behind the airfield, past the fence line and the old dispersal pads, there was a scrapyard. At first glance, it just looked like twisted metal in the weeds. But if you knew the shapes, if you'd lived with those shapes, you could still see them. Spitfires, or what used to be Spitfires. Their wings were stacked like fallen birds, faded roundels, torn control surfaces hanging like skin, fuselage frames open to the weather, ribs showing, canopies gone, bullet patches still visible on some of them, silver circles over the old holes where someone once had tried to keep a pilot alive for one more sortie. Tommy climbed the fence. He shouldn't have, but he did. He walked between the wrecked airframes, and he ran his fingertips along the skin of those machines like he was greeting old friends in a hospital ward. The metal was cold. Some of it flaked under his palm. Some still carried that faint, familiar smell, hot oil that had soaked deep into everything and never really washed out. He stopped beside a Hulk that still had an engine bolted in. A Merlin, weather-beaten, chipped, oxidized. He put his hand on the manifold and just held it there. For a long time he didn't say anything. Then, very quietly, like a confession, "You did it, girl. Not we, you." He remembered the sound. The first time she'd wound up past where she was supposed to go. That violent animal growl. The kind of sound that makes you think 2 things at once. This is beautiful, and this is going to kill somebody. He remembered the bandaged knuckle, the hiss of pressure, the way his stomach tried to crawl up his throat when Reeves taxied out and disappeared into the clouds. He remembered sitting on that oil drum, hands still shaking, thinking, if he dies, that's on me. That's on me forever. He remembered Reeves walking back, alive. He remembered Reeves laughing. "You're bloody mad," Reeves had told him later. And yeah, maybe mad, maybe reckless, maybe criminal. But he also remembered the smell of burning glycol in the cockpit of Hugh Mallory's Spitfire. He remembered that radio call. Calm. Too calm. "Tell the boys the needle's gone red." He remembered the look on the faces of pilots who didn't come back, the ones who left their cigarettes still burning in a coffee mug on the table in the ready hut because they thought they'd be back in 10 minutes. Tommy stood there with his hand on that dead Merlin, and he thought, I couldn't save them, so I did the only thing I knew how to do. I made sure I never sent another man up in a machine that couldn't keep up. He didn't cry, that wasn't him. But something in him settled. That's important, that matters. Because here's what people don't get about men like him. It wasn't glory, it wasn't pride. It was duty. Not king and country duty, closer than that, smaller, sharper. It was my pilot comes home tonight duty. That's it. That's all. Reeves kept his promise. In 1956, more than a decade after the war, Reeves tracked him down in Leeds, just walked into the depot like he owned the place. Tommy was under a bus at the time. "Hall, you stubborn bastard," Reeves said, dropping to a crouch. Tommy slid out on the creeper, blinking in the light. "Took you long enough?" They went to a pub and had that pint. They talked about nothing and everything. Not the war, not really. Just engines, weather, work. Reeves joked that the new boys flying jets had no idea what engine feel even meant. "Everything's dials now," he said. "We used to listen. We could hear when she was unhappy." Tommy nodded. "You always could tell. That's why I picked yours." Reeves paused. "Picked my what?" Tommy almost said it, almost told him flat out. "I chose your Spitfire that night. I chose your engine. I broke the rules for you." Instead, he just smiled and took another drink. Later, walking out into the cool night, Reeves clapped him on the shoulder and said, "You know they'll never write you up for what you did." Tommy shrugged. Wasn't for them. That was the last time they saw each other. Reeves died in 1974. Stroke. He was buried with RAF honors, a small local ceremony. The paper called him a decorated ace who helped defend Britain in her darkest hour. Tommy passed in 1981. Heart failure. No ceremony. A 2-paragraph notice in the local column between a church bake sale and an advert for used lawnmowers. It didn't mention the war at all. It said, Thomas Hall, 64, mechanic, known as reliable, worked with his hands, quiet man, will be missed. Reliable, quiet, missed. That was his medal. So, here's where we are right now, you and me, listening to this, across time. This mechanic, this nobody in the hierarchy, this kid covered in oil who filed down a brass washer in secret and risked prison to buy his pilots an extra 30 seconds of climb. He never got a ribbon. He never got his face in the paper. He never even got the courtesy of, "This started with him." But the truth is simple. That half-millimeter of metal, that illegal boost, that choice made in fear and loyalty and anger, it changed air combat over Britain. Before the boost, the math was ugly. Intercepts missed. Pilots lost. Bombers getting through. Men like Hugh Mallory and Frank Dingo Harris dying with their instruments in the red and the cockpit filling with boiling coolant and fire. After the boost, Spitfires started meeting Messerschmitts head-on instead of underneath and behind. They could climb with them, outturn them in the vertical, punch back. They didn't win every fight. War never works like that. But they stopped losing the way they had been losing. The kill ratios shifted. The survival rates shifted. The entire feeling in the air, that tightness in the throat when the scramble bell rang, shifted. And a nation held on. That's not strategy. That's not speeches. That's not Churchill. That's a mechanic with bloody knuckles and no permission. And here's the part that gets me. Nobody wrote his name in the official story. Not once. So that means it's on us. It's on us to say it out loud and mean it and carry it forward. Leading aircraftman Thomas Hall of Yorkshire, unsung ground crew, RAF Biggin Hill, summer 1940, risked his career and maybe his freedom to force more life out of a Merlin engine than the book said was allowed. Pilots lived because of him. Missions survived because of him. And a lot of men, years later, got to hold their kids because of him. This is not myth. This is not romance. This is the part of the war that didn't make the posters. And if we don't say his name, it vanishes. If we don't say his name, the story becomes, the Spitfire was just great, like it fell out of the sky perfect and brave. It didn't. It was made great. By hands. Hands like his. If this story hit you the way it hit us, tap like so, more people hear it. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Our audience runs from small-town mechanics to history teachers. And make sure you're subscribed so these names don't disappear.